Hello and welcome everyone, particularly those of you new to us here at Achates, and welcome to our session on Money Matters, boosting the impact of your strategic business planning by integrating income generation. Achates Live and Inspires are our free content offers for the sector, supporting our development by bringing together some really interesting voices and perspectives on key topics we're all dealing with. Achates Live, you may know, normally focuses on income generation topics and Inspires on those key strategic leadership issues. But because today's topic is focusing on issues which cover both of those, we've come together for this joint session. For those of you new to our work, Achates is a strategy, income generation, organisational change and recruitment company, and we're pleased to welcome you all today. This session has been recorded and is first broadcast at 1 p.m. on the 8th of May 2025. If you are watching the broadcast live, please note that there are Achates colleagues on hand to answer any questions you might have via the comments section, and you can always get in touch with us via email if you've got questions afterwards. For over 10 years, Achates has provided provocation and inspiration to organisations and individuals across the cultural sector, providing expert market disruptor and inclusive thinking across strategy, recruitment, organisational change, and income generation. Today, we'll be exploring the critical role that income generation plays in your strategic business planning. And I'm delighted to have four incredible speakers with me today, representing two extraordinary organisations. Before we dive in, I'm going to introduce you to our speakers in turn. And when I do, if I could just ask them to unmute themselves and say a quick hello, and then I'll introduce them in a bit more detail and get on with our chat. So firstly, we're joined by some of the team from Northern Ballet, David Collins and Lynn Farnell. David, Lynn, could you just say hello?
Cool. Hi, Vicky.
Hello. Hi, both. Thank you for being here today. So a bit about David and Lynn. David is Executive Director at Northern Ballet, where he's part of a leadership team alongside Artistic Director Federico Bonelli. Northern Ballet are based in Leeds, from where they tour extensively across the UK and internationally. Alongside the professional company of 37 dancers, Northern Ballet is also a centre of excellence for teaching ballet in the north of England and delivers an extensive community and schools outreach programme. David joined Northern Ballet from Opera North, where he was Executive Director and Deputy CEO. And in that role, he led the fundraising campaign for the company's major capital project to create the Howard Opera Centre and transform the Howard Assembly Room as a performance venue with new public spaces right in the heart of Leeds. Prior to that, he was Director of External Affairs at Opera North, leading marketing, box office, communications, digital and development teams. And before moving to Yorkshire to join Opera North, David was Head of Marketing at the RSC, working on productions in Stratford-upon-Avon, London, on tour nationally and internationally. He served as a board member for Opera Europa, the Association of European Opera Companies, and is a trustee of Pilot Theatre in York. Lynn is Development Director at Northern Ballet, leading the company's dynamic fundraising team with work encompassing growth of new and existing income streams, strategic planning, project development, and working directly with major funders and donors. With over 20 years' experience in fundraising in the arts and higher education, Lynn has held roles with the Royal Northern College of Music, Buxton Opera House, the Lowry, and the Royal Exchange. Lynn ran a fundraising consultancy for over 10 years, supporting a range of arts and educational organisations in the North and in London, including Imperial War Museum North, Lancaster University, and supporting a major capital redevelopment of the Museum of Science and Industry in Manchester. Lynn is also a certified business coach and really enjoys mentoring the next generation of fundraisers. She has been a trustee of a number of arts organisations, including chair of Horse and Bamboo Theatre, and until recently was vice chair of the Board of Governors of a local primary school. We're also joined today by some of the team of Rumbear, Helen Shute and Helen Sell. Helen and Helen, could you say hello, please?
Hi. Hello.
Thank you both for being here. So Helen Shute has been the Chief Executive and Executive Producer of Rumbear since March 2017. Since joining, she has been in partnership with Rumbear School, established Rumbear 2, a highly acclaimed ensemble for exceptionally talented international early career dancers. In 2018, she oversaw a worldwide search for a new artistic director and the appointment of Benoit Swan Buffet. Under their leadership, Rumbear has championed exciting and ambitious programmes of creations and important revivals set to tour the UK and internationally. Helen came to Rambert with a broad spectrum of experience across dance, arts, and the entertainment sector. Notably, she founded Hofferschechter Company with the now worldwide acclaimed choreographer in 2008. After producing his seminal work Uprising in 2006 and In Your Rooms in 2007, whilst working as programming associate at The Place from 2005 to 7 on a fellowship awarded by Arts Council England. Under her leadership, Hofferschechter grew to become a major national and international presence, establishing significant partnerships with high-profile venues in the UK and many international dance capitals. And Helen Searle has been development director at Rambert for almost a decade. For the last 3 years, she has also been deputy chief executive. She previously held roles at Opera Holland Park, London Philharmonic, and Scottish Ballet, which included a brief sabbatical to San Francisco Ballet. And outside of work, Helen is brilliantly training to be a yoga teacher. Thank you both all so much for being here. And so, now that we've introduced you to our esteemed panel, I think it's time to move on to the topic in hand. And so, spring has sprung, and with it for many of us, a new financial year. A clean slate and a fresh page on which to enact our best laid plans. For many, 2025 also marks a critical point in our business planning cycle, as many 3- and 5-year plans move into their final year, or perhaps years. This is particularly the case for those who were perhaps preparing for applications to Arts Council England's national portfolio prior to the recent announcement that the next round is being postponed, and the current portfolio extended. However, regardless of your position as an ACE MPO or otherwise, we know that many of you are taking serious steps to think about the next 5 years, or perhaps longer, thinking about what your impact will be, what activity and programs will be there to help you achieve that impact. And so the critical question on all of our minds is, what will the optimal business model be that will underpin and enable you to deliver on your organisational purpose? This question is particularly pertinent as we continue to navigate the increasingly complex challenges of our macro environment while seeking to innovate new ways of working and generated income, as older models prove time and again that they're perhaps no longer fit for purpose. And so a business planning process, as we know, cannot exist in a vacuum. It is a product of central purpose, intended impact, the audiences that you're working for and with, and the business model which underpins and enables it all. And as such, many voices must be heard when developing that plan. It's for this reason that I'm particularly excited to slightly deviate from the norm for some of these occasions and have 4 speakers with us representing 2 organisations, as I'm excited to get a range of perspectives and viewpoints from within an organisation and explore in detail how those different positions might work together when considering these issues and making these plans. And so you'll be pleased to hear that's almost enough from me. And we'll now pass on to our panelists. And I'd like to start by asking them how they currently approach strategic business planning and what they see the role of contributed or earned income should be in shaping an organisation's long-term vision and sustainability. And Team Northern Ballet, I wondered if I could come to you to kick us off, please.
Yeah, no problem. So I guess we thought we'd do a bit of context just where we are as a business in terms of the business planning timeline that we're on. So we can't claim to be new, but we are quite a new-ish leadership team at this organisation. So in the last 3 years, we've had a new chair, new artistic director, new ED and me, new development director in Lynn, and actually some other key new appointments at a senior level as well. So there's been quite a lot of change here. That comes after a period of around 20 years with a very established leadership team. So naturally, there was going to be a sort of a refresh and a renewal of the direction of the organisation. And as a team coming in, looking at what that was, clearly finance was a huge part of it. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, looking at what was a deficit position and really wanting to secure the future of the organisation in a properly sustainable way, what was top of the list of things we needed to address. But how to do that, and I think for us, absolutely the place to start was on purpose. So what is the purpose of Northern Ballet? What do we exist to do? Who do we exist to do it for, and why? What's the impact we want to have in the world? So that's the place we started in terms of the conversations we were having 2 years ago in terms of what would the future model of the organisation look like, and that for us would then unlock our path forward in terms of contributed and commercial income. The board, I think, they were very clear as we came in as a team that in terms of that their focus, contributed income was the thing they felt they absolutely above all else would prioritize. They'd let us get on with running the business, and they as a group supporting us were absolutely eagle-eyed and focused on contributed income. And I think so once we had some real clarity around the purpose, the work we wanted to create, who it was for, that's what's allowed us to really attack that area of contributed income. And in the last 2 years, I think we feel that we've done touching some word, a good job at doing that. So we've managed to really build that contributed income level over the last 2 years. We've done it focused around a really clear articulation of what the work is, who it's for, and a really clear understanding of our footprint in the UK. So in terms of what it means to be an organisation based in Yorkshire, and the philanthropists and trusts and foundations here who would support what we do, and also our role as a national organisation, what that means with, particularly in the world of ballet, key funders in London, who we've a really clear plan around how we want to engage with that cohort of people, which again has been a significant shift for the organisation. That's gone by very quickly for us, I think, but it feels like there have been some successes there for us. There's clearly more to do, more to build on, but we've just recently had a board away day with the senior management team, again, sort of looking at where we are, where we've been in those last 2 years, and what comes next. And I think the thing for us absolutely was to go back to that purpose piece. And I think whilst we're happy with what we had, I think what we now want to really drill into is the audiences and the impact. I think we can articulate it. We know what we're trying to do, but we don't think we can measure it and evidence it as well as we need to. And again, for us, in terms of really supercharging the next level of that contributed income, much more rigor in those areas. If we can do that as an exec team, as trustees, is the thing will unlock successful fundraising to trusts and foundations, to individuals and to corporates. The other part of income, I guess, commercially, I should say there's been a huge focus on ticket sales and ticket generated income, commercial income. But what we haven't done is sort of purpose-led commercial income generation, really. We rent out spaces, those sorts of things. That's the next stage of planning for us. We feel like we've got a really clear, coherent strategy around contributed. We know what we're doing around ticket income and the touring work. The next thing for us is to understand where could we really introduce some new revenue streams, and that feels like an opportunity. That's the next bit of our evolution to address. Lynn, does that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess from a purely development point of view, I've done what all new-ish development directors do, which is you look at the team, you look at where the money's coming in and where it isn't coming in, and what those gaps are, what those opportunities are. And I think in terms of sort of how I feel I input and development inputs into business planning, I think it is actually having that key role in shaping the purpose and impact, and reminding people all the time, why are we doing this? What is why are we doing this particular piece of work? And also being the person in the room who can talk about what those funding opportunities are, whether that's what our donor base seem to be particularly interested in, or what those changes are in the funding ecology in terms of what the major funders are interested in, and so I think it's integral, absolutely integral to business planning and also artistic planning, which seems like an obvious thing to say, but I don't think that's always the case in all organisations, where you're sometimes just given a target and told to get on with it. But actually to be the person in the room who is always sort of talking about purpose, impact. Obviously David talks about it a lot as well, but it's being really key to what are the core aims of the organisation, so that we can actually create those case for supports that show our work is distinctive and unique, and is meeting the interests and needs of funders. So I think that's where we make a difference as a development team.
Yeah, and I think not speaking for you, but Lynn's brilliant at asking the harder questions. Like people get carried away saying we're going to do this thing and why we're going to do it, but Lynn's really, really great at grounding us in sort of, but why, who for, what's it going to do, how are you going to measure it? And I think, and again, we're far from perfect at answering those things, but it's definitely part of every conversation around the choices we make.
That's so interesting and so brilliant to hear about the way those different pillars sort of thread together, and how it can't just be one, one or the other. It has to sort of be a kind of cohesive thing. Thank you so much for sharing that. I wonder if I could turn to Team Rombe now for your perspectives on this kind of conversation about how it's threading through your strategic business planning. Can I hand over to you both?
Sure. So I'll take David's lead and do a little bit of how we got to where we are. And we're as a team, we're a few years into our relationship. So we were a new team in 2018. I joined Rombe in 2017. Helen, you'd come a few months earlier to Rombe, and as you said in your very generous introduction, we also had change with artistic direction and a new chair, and so that all came into place in the 2018-19 season. And as a new team, we were very, very focused on income generation at that point, because we had a very clear remit from the board that we needed to reduce our dependence on our major funder, the Arts Council. We were hovering in the high 60%. In terms of our dependence on that single funder, and it was very, very clear to me in my role when it was advertised, and the task we had as a leadership team was to start to look at other income sources for Rombe. And we had done really significant change. In fact, we doubled our turnover in the first couple of years, with a focus on international touring and co-production, which was an area that Rombe hadn't been exploring as much in the previous 10 years. And alongside that gave Helen as Director of Development a whole new set of individuals to talk to as well. And so that was our starting point. And it was going really well until February 2020, when we had actually 3 productions on the road. One was in Adelaide, one was in Kuwait, and one was in Berlin. And overnight, all three tours came to an immediate end, and for the foreseeable future. And so we found ourselves in COVID in a very confronting position, because we'd made significant investment to get those productions out on the road. And whilst we didn't anymore have all our eggs in one basket, the new basket we'd chosen was looking extremely precarious, to say the least. And so in COVID, as a team, we became very, very focused actually on what are some projects and initiatives that might give Rombe more stable income streams in the long-term future. And so we managed to hang on to our earned income through being extremely opportunistic and responsive. For I'd say probably the whole 2 years of COVID, it was very much like loads of our colleagues, do what you can, make it work, say yes, and see what you can make happen. But we, over that time, also initiated three projects that we called our big bets. Because there was an element of gambling within them, in the sense that we were exploring 3 new avenues for Rombe, and we couldn't be 100% sure that they would be successful. But obviously, within the context of COVID, I think we were quite protected by the need to go fairly cautiously and to a certain extent de-risk them as we went. And those 3 big bets are now forming the pillar of our business plan going forward. So I can talk you through those, but I think that the other thing that has been very significant in our thinking right now, in terms of where we are with our business planning, is that whilst we've managed to keep our income up at the higher level, our costs have rocketed over the last couple of years. And so where we thought we would be in 2024-25 is very, very far from where we are when we look at the bottom line. And the 3 big bets that we will talk through, all sort of objectively doing brilliantly on a lot of their KPIs, but the income margins that they're producing are much, much smaller than we hoped. And it's very clear it's going to take a lot longer than we'd initially hoped for them to have a really significant impact. So we're going to be 100 next year, and that sort of focuses your mind somewhat on the future of the company. And so we are absolutely now sort of sitting down and doing a 3-year plan. And like you said, we'd thought that we had an Arts Council deadline of this summer, so we've been quite focused, and I think we're going to take a little bit more time over it now, but very much on track to doing a 3 to 5 year plan for the organisation that really tries to look at a slightly more flexible model for the organisation. So trying to reduce the pain of the very, very constant outflow and trying to match our outgoings to our opportunities to make income and green light projects in a slightly different fashion, in a way actually going back to how we worked during COVID.
Yeah, and I think that's a key element really, that, you know, as Helen said, we're a very new exec team 8 years ago, and it feels now we're very established, but actually one of the things that we've not done is just ploughed ahead with projects if we've not felt that they're kind of hitting the mark. And so I think that kind of constantly reviewing kind of what we're doing, why we're doing them, what purpose is it serving, is it hitting our vision, you know, is it going to resonate with audiences? Because the other big thing that we did a huge amount of work on, that we'd really started to kind of motor on just before COVID, was a huge kind of audience development piece. As a touring company, we kind of, in common with Northern, we go to venues a lot, but we maybe don't know our audiences that well, and we were really aware that we were, you know, and anecdotally people were coming up to us in theatres and saying things like, I've supported you for years and years and years, and you never write to me. And we were like, we don't know you, you know, you're a Sadler's Wells donor or booker, or you're a Lowry booker or donor. And so we were kind of really aware that all of our donors were essentially having to kind of put their heads above the parapet and tell us that they wanted to support us. And so we also started to do a lot of work of, how can we make sure that we come to audiences in the place that they consume culture? So, you know, we'll talk a little bit in a minute about one of the kind of initiatives that we've launched to do that. But one of the really key things was, how are we making sure that we're going to reach audiences and get them to kind of engage with us in a different way? Because we're aware that if we're going to a venue kind of once yearly, to those audience members, they might think they're a really regular booker of From Bear if they book every third year, whereas maybe we would think a regular booker was someone who came every single year. So just looking at those different relationships, and I think really we worked very closely with a brilliant agency, Maurice Hargreaves McIntyre, to really start looking at our audience and really look at the kind of some psychometric versions of what was going on with our audience, rather than those kind of demographics of like, oh, our audience, you know, all live in one area, or they all, you know, conform to one profile. And one of the things that we made an active decision on was to really start looking at how we engage with the brand, and how we were displaying ourselves as a company, and the kind of the initiatives that we were investing in, how we were then also bringing audiences with us. And so our audience, one of the aims that we're going for is a kind of a larger, what's called a stimulation audience. And they're people who want to be the first to come to things, and they want to be, you know, they want to be able to say, oh, I saw that first on the West End, or and they're not so motivated by, you know,
Stars
5 stars. And so Helen loves a 5-star review. I love to see, well, we all do, but I love to see a poster that says like, you've never seen this before, this is your first chance. And so just trying to look at the way that we engaged with our audience was another really big change that we kind of majored in over the pandemic, and I think continued with some of the pieces that we continue to premiere today. We're just looking at how people might engage with us in different ways.
And it's been brilliant in terms of how my leadership team worked together, because previously, as Helen said, I love 5 stars. So if the poster came to me to approve, I would immediately say, well, why haven't we said it's a masterpiece and that it's 5 stars? And then our artistic director would be focusing on perhaps what the image was, and what the particular dancer who was being showcased, and how they were being presented. And then the audience team would have been formatting it. Whereas now we're all very focused on who are we talking to, and what does this particular poster need to say. And even though I know that I'm very motivated by going to see things that are definitely good, possibly because in my professional life I have to see everything anyway. So if I'm buying a ticket myself, I really want to be sure it's going to be a good evening. But actually, we know that we're going after this audience is a bit more adventurous, that are looking to be the first to see things. And from my point of view, the audience's team point of view, development team's point of view, and the artistic team's point of view, everybody's talking together about what's the most compelling message to that audience. And I think that has really, really made a difference.
Yeah.
Would you like us to run through the big bets, or do you want to give Northern? Okay, so sorry, so the three big bets separated into branded productions. And I hope that at least some people listening, watching will have heard of our recent production of Peaky Blinders, The Redemption of Thomas Shelby. After I worked at Hoffer Schechter Company, I had a relatively short couple of years, but really brilliantly informative time working in television and film production. And as I went into Rhombert, as it happens, I'd met Steve Knight, the creator of Peaky Blinders, and had become very interested in this idea of working with a television brand that already had an audience, to see if we could bring them into theatres to see a different type of show. And I think that the reason we called it a branded production was because we were very aware that previously we'd relied on our own brand, Rhombert, or the name of the choreographer to attract audiences. And actually some very humbling government research told us very quickly that we were talking to a very, very small number of people who had heard of us, let alone any of the choreographers that we were working with. And so the concept was find something that feels authentic to us. And, you know, the catchline for Peaky Blinders was very much, if Tommy Shelby had been to the ballet, he would have seen Rhombert, because we were there in Birmingham in the 1920s and 30s. But beyond that, it was find something that gives new audiences comfort that they're coming to see something that they know what it is, that they like it, that they're interested in, that they're fans of, and then through the production introduce them to the wonderful world of Rhombert. The first, well, we're just coming to the end of our second tour at the moment. There are tickets on sale throughout the UK. Am I allowed to say that, Vicky? At the moment, feel free to hop online and come and have a look. But we are just approaching 200,000 people seeing that production over just 2 tours. I think we sort of say loosely tripling our audience, our annual audience, for a single production. And what we know is not all of those 200,000 will become Rhombert fans or connect with Rhombert, but we know that we're taking them on a journey, and everything from the way that we work with the venues, the communication that we use to really help the Peaky Blinders audiences understand that they're getting to meet this company as part of this show. And our programs, which if you flip them upside down, become a Rhombert magazine, and then you can flip them back and they become a Peaky Blinders brochure. It's been a really significant piece of thinking around how do we make sure people connect to Rhombert.
How do we welcome them to the theatre
Yeah.
as well? You know, if they're used to seeing, in particular, like a West End show, like all the front of house team have Peaky Blinders caps on. It's like a welcoming environment. It's, yeah, incredible.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun as well. So that was the first big bet, and we are about to announce a second television branded production, and actually we were congratulating our colleagues at Northern on their television branded production. I think it's a really interesting way of getting people off the sofa and into theatres, is by connecting with them something that they've seen and they know. And it's been very successful in terms of classic stories and in terms of books, but I think television was a little bit untapped, and I think it's really exciting to see several shows.
Yeah.
There's Stranger Things now on the West End as well, isn't that? Which was on my list, so I'm a bit annoyed about that. But
I also just think on that line around kind of contributed versus earned income, it's also allowed us to kind of structure a production differently. So for Peaky Blinders, we got investment for the first time from individuals, and that was a very different model to anything we've ever done before. Previously, if we'd asked anyone to support a production, it was through pure philanthropy. And I guess, you know, as we're talking to the sector, I think it's also a shout out to colleagues at the National Theatre who really helped us, walked us through and held our hands through that kind of taking investment for the first time. And I think that that's one of the kind of brilliant things about being part of a connected sector. And Achates is so brilliant at doing that you feel like you can just pick up the phone and say, we've got a bit of we're trying to do this thing, can you help us? And I think one of the things I love most about working in the art sector is just how collegiate people are and how willing they are to say, we tried this, it didn't quite work for us, so if we did it again, we do it this way, and why don't you try that? So I think for us it's been a really brilliant learning curve of how to attract investment. And yeah, by the time this is aired, it will be public that we've managed to secure some more investment from the Arts Council's pilot scheme of incentivising touring repayable grants. So again, just looking at a different way of launching another production. So
it's true, and I think that we wouldn't have felt able to apply for the Arts Council fund had we not had the Peaky Blinders experience, because we were adept and ready to report to an investor that's hoping to get their money back, which has been a completely new approach for us. The other big bets, one had started just before COVID, because we were very aware that we always had waiting lists for our in-studio classes at Rhombare, and also you could only access those classes if you lived in the vicinity or worked in the vicinity of our studio on the South Bank. And so we've been starting to think about whether we could stream our classes and building it was going to be an app, and it ended up being something that looks like an app, but it's actually a website, with the thought that we could create a sort of live online dance class offer. And so we were really lucky that when COVID hit and we were stuck at home, we'd already started the planning and building for this, and we were able to attract some Innovate funding from the government very quickly to build what is now called Rhombare Plus.
And I think that's interesting too, because we'd never before applied to a competition, which is what those kind of Innovate, it was UK research and investment, and it was a very, very different process to go through for a fundraiser when you're kind of looking at like what the competition is, and then our reporting structures were very different, and it was a brilliant learning curve in many ways to work out how, if we did want to upskill and we want to kind of embrace new tech, we might need to use different language. And I think it also helped us organisationally, because for the first time we realised that we really needed a digital advisory board if we were going to kind of continue in this vein, and that's been really helpful for years after the process. So I think that kind of the manner in which we got the funding to build Rhombare Plus has really helped us in the future to cement it as a potential income generation.
Yeah, and we launched it as a free to view, free to use platform with the Innovate funding, and then with Transform funding from the Arts Council, we've switched now to there's quite a lot of free to view content on Rhombare Plus, but we now have a subscription model for our classes and courses, which is nearly generating a six-figure sum for the company, but not quite. But again, please feel free to subscribe if you want to help us on that way. And we've got 350 dance classes recorded, a lot of them taught by the dancers of the company, but also other specialists in different art forms, and they range from classes for young children to professional dancers, ballet classes, disco, contemporary, and everything in between. And what's Rhombare Plus was serving the idea of making our classes more available, but it was absolutely intrinsic to that this is the first time we've ever had any audience data. And so we now have, I think, 20,000 plus memberships on Rhombare Plus, and that's the first time we've been able to speak directly to our audiences. So back to Helen's point about meeting really wonderful people in the foyer of the various different theatres we travel to, and them having to approach us and engage us in conversation. We've now starting to have a conversation with our audiences that we weren't able to have before. And then the final big bet, which was launched also, it was also a conversation that had started before the pandemic, and really couldn't have been a worse business to launch during the pandemic, but we're really pleased we did, and it's growing beautifully. Is a joint venture with Rhombare School, which is the Rhombare Creative Contemporary Dance Grades, which is an Ofqual accredited syllabus for contemporary dance. And the reason I say it couldn't have been worse in the pandemic is, of course, because all dance classes and private dance schools were forced to shut down. Young people weren't going to school to take their dance classes. But what we were able to do in that time was to train teachers online. And so we switched from in-person training to online training, which has resulted in teachers in 38 different countries around the world now being accredited Romberg grades teachers, and they're teaching our syllabus to their students, and we offer examinations, which is the income stream for the business. And so it's taken a couple of years for the accredited teachers to start entering students in exams, but we're now seeing a very, very fast uptick in students, really from all over the world. There are 700 teachers currently teaching, about 50% in the UK and the rest worldwide. And it's really a joyful thing when we get the update of, you know, the first entry. Recently we've had our first entries from South Korea and from Turkey. But what we're seeing there is a real demand for really high quality training from dance teachers, lots of support and resource for them, and professional development opportunities throughout the year. And a syllabus that is really truly accessible, which is, going back to Helen's point, everything that we do has to be driven through our brand values. And so the syllabus is accessible to all body types, accessible to, it's gender neutral in its nature. We've had dancers passing exams using wheelchairs. It's a really, really joyful project to work on, and it's great to have a partnership with our school because we're separate entities, but this has really brought us closer together.
Thank you, guys.
We're really tired because the bottom line doesn't look that much better.
Not at all. You're doing that's so interesting to hear. I've got so many questions floating around from what both of you have said, and David and Lynn, the kind of what you brought in as well there. And I think there's some really key threads going through from everything that you're doing, even though you're both coming at it from slightly different angles. But what feels very present to me is that there are three things getting equal weighting here in your planning, which is the work, the art, the audiences in whatever way you are defining those audiences, and then the money to facilitate all of that. And Achates, anyone who's kind of worked with us or who has read any of our stuff knows that triple bottom line, as we talk about a lot, is the sort of sweet spot and that kind of magic delivery. And I wonder if I could sort of bring it back over to David and Lynn and sort of think about some questions kind of following up from that, which is often, you know, a lot of organizations that perhaps don't have the scale and reach that some of you guys may have at Romberg and Northern Ballet, but still it's very relevant in that there's often a nervousness when you talk about income generation or money being centered, that it's going to become, you know, the tail's wagging the dog. Funders or investors are dictating what we do, and it's the expense of our independence and of our artistry, etc., etc. And it certainly sounds to me from what you were saying that you have navigated away, perhaps both companies through that. And I wondered if you could speak to kind of how you've avoided that tail wagging the dog, to use that metaphor again, to kind of hold that balance and keep those three things kind of in play productively. David and Lynn, are you okay to start us off on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Just before we do, Romberg guys are massively inspiring, particularly for us, because I feel like we're at the next bit where we're looking at that purpose-led income generation. So the examples they've given just are really, they're inspiring and sort of hopeful for us, because we feel like, okay, that's the route we want to go down, like stuff that's really pinned to who you are and what you exist to do. That's the way we should go. So it's great to know that someone's out there doing it, as much as it does sound like an awful lot of hard work. So in answer to your question, I guess tail wagging dog, I think we do guard against chasing money for money's sake. I sort of square brackets. I think the thing that we find challenging is that funders want new. So you develop a really impactful program of work, and it is time limited in terms of funding. When that funding comes to the end, what do you do with it? And there can be a sort of push to think, well, okay, then let's invent something new, and you're constantly sidestepping, and then you do find yourself chasing money to do, and you have to catch yourself. Why are we inventing these new things that we didn't want to do? We wanted to do that thing over there. We were already doing it. I don't think we've got an easy answer to that, but some of the thinking and work we've been doing of late is to kind of take a step back and go, actually, what are the things we do really well that we think are unique, that are really valuable, that have a real impact in people's lives? All right, that's been funded by a particular funder for a 2-year trial period. They may be stepping away, but the challenge to us, I think, is to really drill into has it had an impact in people's lives? Has it done good work? Can we evidence it? And then really dig deeper and do the work better, and then unlock the funding. That feels a more credible, sustainable way of going forward than in this constant side. You can find yourself sidestepping into just chasing new pots of money, but it is very tempting when you think, well, we could just, we could adapt, but I think that's something to guard against. I think the thing we're experiencing, so the guys talked really eloquently about Peaky Blinders, so we're at the beginning of a similar but different journey with Gentleman Jack. And I think for us, it's the first main stage production that Federico, our artistic director, has commissioned here. And it felt the right project because it really aligned with a lot of the things we want to do in terms of the sort of story we want to tell, what are the themes we want to address, where are we from, like loads of those things aligned on that story. Plus, would people want, the familiarity point I think Helen made is a really good one. Will people feel that they can cross the threshold to experience this story, which actually we think might be, in its own way, for a classical ballet company, quietly revolutionary in terms of some of the things it's doing around gender, but it's got a more comforting route in. And then what we're experiencing, because it feels so core to who we want to be as an organisation, we can talk to our funders and our donors about it with real, I guess, integrity and passion. And that's working. So if you look at the private individuals who we've gone to first to tell this story, they're really responding to wanting to help tell this story because they think it makes sense to them. As with the guys, we've just been really fortunate to win an award for the production before, as we start to commission it, which comes with some sort of some affirmation from our peers internationally that artistically it's a really interesting project. It also comes with some money, which isn't not unhelpful. So it feels like it's really gathering momentum, and we haven't started making it yet. The thing we've then tried to do is say, well, okay, if that's what's happening on the main stage, what else does this company do? So, we have a very active learning team. So we're going to be going out into schools in the Coldsdale area where Anista was from, and doing a project around identity, and which feels very pertinent right now, given what's going on in the world, but going out to young people in school settings through the prism of Gentleman Jack and dance, and saying, you can be who you want to be and have the self-confidence in your body to be who you want to be. And we'll approach that through dance. And then we're looking at a community project that does similar things, engaging with some co-creation work that will only happen if we find the funding for it. But it doesn't feel like we're chasing money. It feels like we've got a really clear idea of what we want to do that would enrich the whole artistic endeavour, make more impact in people's lives. It feels like we have momentum, we are being successful, and there's more to go out with it. Does that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the idea of kind of tail wagging the dog it is a fear sometimes we're chasing funding. I think particularly in sort of American models where it's so heavily sort of philanthropic, that there is this sort of fear that individual donors can try and influence your program, your revival. I don't think we're at that point with any of our funders. I know obviously everything in the news recently around Wigmore Hall and they're sort of stepping away from wanting to be funded by the Arts Council, and some of those sort of similar things have come to the fore that funders are pushing arts organisations in directions they don't want to go. That is not something that I think either of us are concerned about here. And to use the example of Gentleman Jack, we have not worked in secondary schools for a number of years. That's for quite a lot of different reasons. One being that we have a fantastic children's ballet offer for early years, which is quite unique and distinctive in the industry. So inevitably, a lot of our schools work is all tied around our artistic output. But also, and I'm sure a lot of people will have these similar issues, it's getting harder and harder to work with secondary schools around sort of funding for trips and timetabling and all these issues, which make it harder to work with that group. So something like Gentleman Jack gives us a chance to speak to people that perhaps young people that we've not been able to reach before, or perhaps we've reached through our primary school work and now we can reach them again, but also go to new funders who perhaps want to fund work for older young people. So it's a way where if we do this well and we plan effectively, we can actually tick a lot of boxes and meet a lot of our KPIs and objectives with our work, while also opening new opportunities for funding. It doesn't always work as perfectly as that, but that's the ideal.
Brilliant. So it need to get booking on everything that you guys are all mentioning. I'm gonna have to get myself sorted. Helen, do you have anything else to add to the points raised here about this idea of that kind of fear that can sometimes exist around funding or funders dictating direction and the artistic independence, etc.? Is there anything else that you would add to that you guys are doing, or that have kind of you come up against that, or maybe not? Maybe I've invented it completely.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think that, you know, we could talk really eloquently about our brand-driven projects, and we are doing those, and we're really proud of them. But like, I think all arts organisations over the past few years have fallen into exactly the trap that Lynn and David were talking about, where you suddenly realise you're starting to construct funding applications around the criteria or around the offer that presents itself. And I think we've struggled with that more within our core development targets. When we're very clear on a project, it's really easy. It's more around how do we then sustain the core of the organisation, and finding that we're saying yes to funds and then having to do more and more to sort of justify those applications, and we're going to take a different approach.
Yeah, well, I think two things. I think firstly, we also, I think sometimes development teams are also able to see trends that are emerging, that and things that we might need to change in our business model, not so that we're reactive and that we're chasing that funding, but that if you keep seeing, like, I mean, I guess a really good example is about 2 years before the last round of MPO, I kept seeing more around environmental sustainability, and it's something we've been talking a lot about as an organisation anyway, but it just became really clear to me that that was going to become more and more important to funders, in the same way that you know, I think Rambert has always really celebrated diversity and inclusivity, so we knew that we were always kind of like fitting into those parameters of funders, and particularly after the murder of George Floyd, we were really clear that when we were applying for funding, that was something we could really back up with data. Whereas I kept seeing this line about environmental sustainability, and it
was actually incongruous with our international touring plan. So if you were right, you actually brought it in as a kind of a strategic priority.
So yeah, as an exec team, we started to talk about what we might do, what we might change, and then it meant that when the MPO round was announced, we were kind of poised and ready to go, because we already knew how we'd want to react to that kind of investment principle, and certainly, you know, it's a kind of line that we keep seeing in trusts, and you know, we've been able to change some of our work to kind of fit that. But yeah, in terms of the tail wagging the dog, I think for a really long time, certainly in our time, we've always counted development income in a year's budget before we get it in, and I think that's in common with lots of arts organisations. We kind of know what the gap is, and we're like, this is the target, and then I go away and think about, like, oh, we could probably get that from trusts, we could probably get that from individuals, and we divvy it up. And we've had a kind of like slightly revolutionary moment over the last few months, where we've started to think about, actually, what if we didn't count that income as guaranteed? What if we look at the budget and we kind of cut the budget to look at our productions, and to look at the investment that we have in people, and to look at our participation programs, and we try and see what is already balanced via ticket income or contributed income, earned income. And then we start to build the contributed income piece. And so the target doesn't change. We still need to raise the same amount of money, but it's a totally different way of looking at it. And well, we'll come back and tell you how it's working, but we think that it might engage, well, donors slightly differently, rather than kind of giving to, you know, okay, you're giving to a production, but it's a, you know, £750,000 production. What difference is my 10 grand going to give? Actually, if we can say we've got a £70,000 gap to take it on tour to these 3 venues, and we know someone's got a connection to a venue, actually maybe they might give £25,000 to that. That's, you know, a different way of looking at it. But really, as well, in terms of our board and our development board, and individuals who we ask to act as ambassadors, that we can start to kind of chip away at those at that target in a different way. And you know, we might see that, oh, there's someone who we know is going to be really interested in that project, because it's only going to, you know, we can now see that section of the project is, say, £5,000, or, and you know, someone's been giving us £3,000 annually. Like, wouldn't that be a brilliant uptick? But we can also really, again, bringing back the purpose and the triple bottom line, you know, there's a reason that we're asking you for that. We're not just saying, oh, wouldn't it be lovely if you increased your donation by £2,000? Like, here's what it's going to pay for. And so I'm really excited about this. Well, I think we both are. But and I think when you've been in an organisation for a long time, there are times where you think, oh, maybe it's time to do something else. And then every time we have something that changes, like a business model or like a new production or like a new way of looking at a problem, it re-galvanizes you into staying for longer to celebrate the centenary.
I'm excited about the centenary celebrations that I'm sure will be announced. And thank you both for sort of sharing that. And Helen, you've beautifully led me to my next question. It's almost, I feel like, slip you a virtual tenner for doing that. It wasn't planned, everyone watching, I promise. But it's just sort of thinking about some of those practical things, because, you know, we've talked about already and kind of heard some really brilliant examples from you guys about the ways that you are looking at that trilogy of pillars that make up your model, about the kind of importance of relying on that purpose to make those decisions. And I just wonder if we could think, because obviously our audience today, those watching, are going to come from lots of different kinds of organizations in lots of different parts of the sector. And I wonder if we could just talk a little bit practically about who are those key players within the organizations. Obviously, each of yourselves are critical, but who else are you working with when making these plans, these business plans? And do you have any other practical advice? Helen, you could give a really interesting sort of potentially revolutionary budgeting hack that you're bringing in there, and we all want to find out in a year's time how it's going, of course. But any other sort of systems, processes that you might maintain to maintain an active dialogue around this, both at that planning process stage, but obviously once a business plan is set, it doesn't then just, that's not it. It then has to be executed and monitored and kind of moved on. So David and Lynn, could I maybe come back to you guys for a little bit more practical advice and who those key people are when you're working through this?
I don't.
Oh, I think you're on mute there, David.
I was just saying, I don't know that I've got anything as revolutionary as what Helen's just dropped into the conversation, which is very exciting. I don't know. Do you think...
I was just saying, we were worried that everyone else was already doing it. And I was saying, no, so good. Glad that feels different.
Not well, you go then, but
I think we certainly the way that David and Federico lead the organisation is very consultative, and that and actually also the way that the board operate. And I've worked with a lot of organisations over the years. I would say that this is the most open organisation to work in, genuinely. Not just saying that, because David's
I now need to give an actual tenor.
And so but we have certain processes that are set up. So whether that's our directors meeting, our artistic planning meetings, the people within the board that have key roles, where there's lots of opportunity to discuss, adapt, review through the year. As a development team, we have our own plan, we have our KPIs. You're doing what any manager really would do, and monitoring and adapting and reforecasting and sitting there with the finance director and going, well, that one didn't work, but look, this event was great, and there's lots more money there. So I think just that open dialogue we're doing well with that.
Yeah. It doesn't feel revolutionary, but really important. We've got an amazing board. That they, from the chair down, they are just so incredibly supportive of what we're trying to do. And one interesting thing I think is they've been totally focused on fundraising. They kind of feel like, what can we do? How can we help? They empower us, and they'll help us with the tricky other things that we have to deal with and navigate. They're there for that, and they're very experienced business people on the whole. But they're so focused on fundraising and how they can help and how they can contribute. And we're lucky in a few of them who can actually really help open some doors and steer some of those things. So that's been fantastic up till now. I think there's an interesting question for us with the trustees that we're having around how do we evolve the board to bring different sorts of expertise and lived experience onto the board that might perhaps unlock some different revenues towards contributed income with a slightly broader skill set or lived experience. But they're really receptive to that, because they go, how do we help? How do we best position you to find this revenue? They're also really trying to support us on the development of commercial revenue. So we've got trustees with expertise who again are sitting with us, looking at our business planning and kind of gently nudging us, or not so gently nudging us in the right direction. And then, as Lynn says, I think we, as a team, we've tried to open out to be a very transparent leadership and then management team where there's a lot of dialogue. I think sometimes the organisation has been in a bit of shock. So there's too many questions being asked of us, you know, and there is a balance for us as a leadership team to say, where do we sit in terms of consultative versus clarity of direction? But certainly as a senior management team, and I would also, to Federico, our artistic director, he's really remarkably receptive to understanding some of these practicalities, and understanding, he just gets it. He's got a pragmatic understanding of if we're going to do something really interesting, we're going to have to find a financial route to doing it. So how do we do that? And how does he tweak his ideas and his planning to just so you hit a sweet spot? It doesn't feel like a compromise ever. It feels like an understanding of there will be a sweet spot in terms of marrying artistic vision with commercial imperative, with what's fundable. And also I would say he's a very good fundraiser as well, which is very helpful to us.
Brilliant. Thank you. Some really interesting kind of takeaways there around like the network around you and how you galvanize them around that kind of focus. Team Rombear, any further hints and tips and critical people involved in your work on this?
Well, I think it's actually.
Do you want to start?
Yeah, because I think
how great it is.
Yeah, I agree. You know, I'll need to see the tenor first. But I think I agree with Lynn. Like, I love working at Rombear. I love working with Helen, and it's one of the reasons I've stayed for such a long time, because I find it a genuinely invigorating place to work. And I also feel like we have a leadership team who are very, very, very collaborative and very. We have a house rule that, you know, we hear brilliant ideas no matter where they come from, and I think that is so true at Rombear. You know, we can have a junior member of staff who will say something in a team meeting like, "Could we ever try doing like X?" And then the next day it's happening. And I think, you know, it's one of the joys of working for a kind of quite small organisation that we can make some of those changes, and there's not so many layers. And I also think as an exec team, I think we're quite open and present, and so that if we hear that there's ideas happening in the office, we'll sometimes enact them. Not to say that we always listen, and to your point, David, we're not always, you know, there is a balance of like how much you're allowing I guess the tail to wag the dog of the organisation. But I think the only thing I wanted to mention is Helen's dual role. So she's chief exec and executive producer, and I think that has a really interesting balance of managing the kind of commercial side of the organisation, but also always considering the artistic. And I think that, you know, that being the kind of the role at the top of the organisation, it's the first time I've ever worked for an organisation that has that. You know, I've worked for organisations where the artistic director is also the chief exec, or there is a chief exec who's not on the artistic side, who, you know, and there's sometimes can be almost like not quite a battle, but a kind of definite like meeting of wills. And so it's so interesting to work for an organisation that doesn't have that in play. So
yeah, I just fight with myself in the evenings over what the priorities. I absolutely agree with David around the importance of having an artistic director. I think I think there's a new generation of artistic directors coming through, and both Northern and Rombear have got one who are very, very sensitive to the need to be. Sometimes the idea of being more commercial is seen as a negative, but I think that at Rombear we see the word commercial actually kind of in line with the word accessible. So if, you know, productions being more accessible to more people inevitably means that we can increase the budgets and the finances around them. And I think it's really important to have an artistic director who engages with that and thinks not just about what they want to do from a curatorial perspective, but also who they want to see the work and who they're hoping to bring into the theatres. The other piece at Rombear that is new since my tenure is, and probably because I'm a producer myself, is that we developed a producing team. Yeah. And so that Helen, as director of development, has a producing team to work alongside, who are very much focused on not just thinking about the different productions that we're doing, but who are the partners going to be on those productions. And so that crosses over from individual investors to venue partners to other brands that we think would be aligned. And you and Fran, who's our director of producing, work extremely closely, and often seen going off together to do a double pitch on something.
And I think also you know, it's that classic, like everyone in your organisation should be a fundraiser, but really our producing team are always fundraisers, and they're always looking out for the opportunities, and they're also making sure that when they read, say, a contract, they're like, we can't agree to that, you know. So they, you know, and I think that there are, again, I've worked for organisations where you'll find, you know, you're almost in final negotiations with the sponsor, and then you find out it's impossible because of the contract you have with someone. And I just think like that would never happen, because our producing team are so on it from the start of like, okay, here's, you know, here are the parameters that we're able to work within. So yeah, it's that collegiate approach.
Yes.
Thank you so much. So interesting to hear. And I think, you know, what I'm really hearing from you both, from both organizations, is this culture of how those three things, your work, your audience, and your money, the culture is coming from your artistic leadership, your executive leadership, from your boards. Then everyone in the organization can understand that. It doesn't perhaps feel so daunting. It doesn't feel so like the money's over here and everything else is over here, because it just, and if it flows through that, then, you know, magical things happen, as you're all demonstrating. I have about 50,000 other questions that I'd really like to ask you all, but we are now coming up to an hour together, and you're all incredibly busy people, and our audience watching today are also incredibly busy people, sort of, you know, who need to get back to their jobs and take all of the inspiration that you've given us, and start applying it to their own work. So I'm actually going to draw a line on our questions right now, sadly, because I could sit here with you all afternoon, but that would be selfish. So a huge thank you to David, Lynn, Helen for joining us today, and to everyone who's watching either in the broadcast on the 8th of May or afterwards. It's certainly given me a lot of food for thought and a lot of inspiration about the way that we work, and I think I'll be thinking about it for a long time, and possibly getting in touch with more questions next time I see you or to talk to you. So if you're watching on the 8th of May, there is a colleague online for the next 10 minutes or so for any further questions, but also please feel free to send them in via email. And please always remember, Achates is here to help, whether that's in implementing a new business strategy and obviously incorporating income generation in some of the ways these brilliant teams are already doing, developing your fundraising plans, alternative income, recruitment support, and change management. We're here for you if there's anything we can do. We've also recently launched Achates Community, which some of you watching may be aware of, but if you're not, it's a revolutionary new platform for cultural sector charity employees to develop your skills and your experience across income generation and all aspects of running your cultural organisation. It includes over 50 masterclasses on ranges of topics, from income generation strategies, identifying purpose, working with your board, and there's also a leadership training programme there for you. So if you'd like to learn more about that, have a look at our website. There may also be an opportunity for a free 1-month trial if you're lucky. And we'll be back in touch with an Achates Inspires in July and a live session in June. So keep an eye on your inboxes for the topics of those. And thank you very much. We'll see you soon.